We're talking about Nasir Jones and 21 Savage. I know I'm 26 years old and I love music from the 90s, the 80s. My mom raised me on certain artists. One of those artists being Nas. 21 Savage was on Clubhouse, essentially saying that an artist is not relevant if his core audience is not 30 years or below. You know, I don't know if that's 100% accurate, and I don't believe that that's accurate, because being relevant doesn't mean just that. It doesn't mean that by definition you have to be 30 years or less to have relevant music. If your audience is not 30 years or less, you're not relevant. That's not a definition, that's not a term. I understand where 21 Savage is coming from, where he could say, maybe if he was saying this, I think he was, that Nas has a core base from the 90s where they're now in their mid to late 40s, early 40s, and their 50s almost, and they are not relevant because hip hop's a young sport. But let's even take that into context. Hip hop was a young sport. It's always going to be a young sport. But people like Nas are proof that in today's culture, in today's state of hip hop, that hip hop is not only a young culture, it's a middle in between culture, it's an old culture, it's everyone's culture. And I understand when 21 says, well, just because you have that core fan base, that doesn't make you relevant. Well, if you know Nas and you know his discography, you would know from the beginning, real quick, that he is more relevant than we realize. Because all you gotta do is just look at Nas's discography from Illmatic to now King's Disease 3. 15 studio albums. And that doesn't mean that you're relevant. I'm not there yet, but follow me. You have a guy who made his debut album in 1994. It's considered like the greatest hip hop album of all time, if not one of the greatest hip hop albums of all time. After that, he has these other albums that come out after. It Was Written, Nostradamus, all these other albums, and they're not meeting the same standard of Illmatic, based off what the media is saying, based off what the fans are saying at the time. You take this guy's career, he almost had his career diminished by one of the biggest rappers, Jay-Z, back in the early 2000s. What I'm trying to get at is Nas has seen so much backlash. He has had hip hop against him in a lot of moments, and he has proven every other 3 to 4 years he drops impactful albums where maybe they didn't resonate at first when they dropped, but they resonate way after or a couple years after. Illmatic to Stillmatic to God's Son. It Was Written is still a great album too, and people don't give it credit, right? But now let's talk about his later albums. Untitled album and the one before that, Hip Hop Is Dead. These albums are very relevant to hip hop. It's what's pushing hip hop to where it's currently at today. Take it to now. With the trilogy of King's Disease, you have King's Disease 1, 2, and now 3. And right in between there, you have another project called Magic. This project is a 9 out of 9. I mean, you hear the beats, you hear the production. This does not sound like production that is not relevant to today's sound. So to even say that he's not relevant because he sounds like an old artist, that's not even true. Nas literally brings what he brought back from the 90s, and now in this time in the 2020s is perfecting his old 90s sound and adding new ways to appease to an audience that he's never met, never known, because they're my audience. It's the Gen Z audience that he is now opening his music to. And maybe he's not targeting us specifically, but you can't say that King's Disease 1, 2, or 3 are not mentioned by 25-year-olds, 20-year-olds. A lot of these 20-year-olds, 15-year-olds even, their parents grew up on Nas, okay? A lot of these kids have parents that are bumping King's Disease right now. Those kids love hip hop. You think their parents aren't gonna school them on Nas? That alone makes Nas relevant. He'll never leave because his music continues to evolve with the times. He still also keeps elements of what made him one of the greatest rappers from the beginning, from the Illmatic days. He is showing you that he can continue this path for 20, 30, even 40 years almost. Like, that is something that should not be looked at as not relevant. Just because you're not selling over 100,000 your first week anymore, that shouldn't be the only reason or the main reason why you're relevant. Talking about the business side of Nas, I mean, Nas has so many business ventures that he has gotten into from the beginning, early 2010s, that have now made him hundreds of millions of dollars richer. Separate from music, he has been able to find a way out of music, so he doesn't even need to drop these classics he's dropping right now. He took a different route. He started getting into venture capitalism, financing himself, putting money with other business-like individuals, and they have a venture group, and they invest $4 or $5 million back in 2012, 2013 in Lyft and Coinbase, all these companies back then, to now selling those stocks that they invested in years ago, to now being worth hundreds of millions of dollars after selling those stocks and shares that they had in Lyft, Coinbase. Nas was one of those investors back then to invest his small $1 million money to make it big $100 million money just within 7 to 10 years. And you want to say that's not being relevant? But again, this is where 21 Savage proved himself wrong. He is relevant, Nas is, because not only was he able to become a business entrepreneur, capitalist, whatever you want to call it, he was able to become a successful entrepreneur. And the money he made from hip hop, he invested it into businesses that made him hundreds of millions of dollars, to now he comes back years later dropping these classic albums. And I can guarantee you, most likely, he's making these albums now because he's inspired. He feels great. Life is really good this time. He's making all these streams of income sources now. He doesn't have to work as hard in real estate, or in hip hop, I should say. He can relax if he wanted to, but he still decides, after making all these business moves, these smart money moves, making 20 million here, 20 million there, 100 million now here. Now he's like, well, I'm in a good space. I'm gonna come back and give hip hop what it needs. And let's just keep it 1,000. Without Nas, we wouldn't have the new age rappers that we have today. Without the core base of hip hop and what it is, we wouldn't even have the sounds be inspired to make hip hop what it is today. Just because, Nas is from New York doesn't mean he doesn't inspire somebody from San Diego, from Atlanta, from LA. That type of hip hop it should be cherished while we still have it. And that type of hip hop artist should be more cherished, because again, a lot of us 25 and older, 26, 27-year-olds, we grew up on some of these 90s artists. And a lot of those 90s artists from that era are not successful or able to live off of their own riches from hip hop or from investments outside of hip hop, because they weren't doing the moves that a person like Jay-Z, Nas, Diddy, Dr. Dre. You gotta follow these people and realize, okay, they may not be relevant on the surface, but they are relevant for the long-term benefit of their lives and for the culture. Because if you have more like-minded people like Nas, like Jay-Z, like Dre, like Diddy in hip-hop, and you have more of those people come into hip-hop and have that same mindset that these people have in their 40s and 50s, like Nas, like Jay-Z, we're gonna have more millionaires. We're gonna have more entrepreneurs making more than just hundreds of thousands of dollars. We're all gonna be millionaires if we all apply the same mindset that Nas has, not only to his businesses outside of rap, but to how he applies his rap now, staying relevant to the new sounds, not changing who he is to his core. He's now finding niches, essentially, kind of like real estate. He keeps his old niche, his old core base of fans, and now he has a new base of fans by going in the studio with Hit Boy, dropping classic after classic after classic. If Nas ain't relevant, I'll just say this. If Nas ain't relevant, I don't want to be relevant, okay? I want to be like Nas when it comes to making money moves at the same time. Longevity like no other.